The list slicing notation is always used to read multiple elements from a list, basically creating a new list which may contain the desired elements that you want. Here we have one list named as Boston Bruins with having three elements in it. Suppose if we want to list out all the elements, all the three elements, so we can use as list notation like this. The starting index is 0 and the end index is 2. Okay, so it's not going to contain all the elements in the list, rather than it will include the elements with 2 minus 1, the end index minus 1, which is equals to 1, so that it will print the element at first index 0 and the second index 1 only. So this is the resulting element. Now let's say you want to add these two elements only. Okay, sorry, I made a mistake. Let me just change it. Okay, so now this first with the index at 1, Patrick. Uh, okay, so I moved it. Okay, let me just run it. So now as you see, the element at notation at index 1, now we have Patrick, and the element at index, it says 3, right? So that should be 3 minus 1, which is equals to 2. So that is printed in the output. This is the first notation type, the list slice notation with having the start index and end index. Let's say we want to start at the rear end. So at the rear end means, suppose say we have this list over here, and we want to start from the right hand side, from the rear end of the list. So to start at the rear end, we need to use the negative indices. So the negative indexes should be in this way. Let's say we want to print only those election years except the last one. So the last one is at index minus 1. So if I will write like this, starting at 0, but I don't want to include the last index. So when we run it, as you see, we have only those years starting with the start index 0 and ending with minus 1 minus 1, and here the last index is minus 2. So that is why we just have these four elements. So let's say we want to have the notation like the start index is 0 and end index is minus 3 minus 1. So this is your minus 1, this is minus 2, and this is minus 3. It's not going to include 2000, rather than it will just include these two elements only. So here you are having this notation. Now let's say you want to have the notation in this way, minus 3 minus 1. So what does it mean? It will start at minus 3 and stop at minus 2. Only these two elements. So here it is, the output. Now let's see. There is one concept in string slicing called as stride. So stride indicates how many elements do we want to skip in between the extracted items in the list. So let me first try to print out the list. Here we have the list starting with 0 and ending at 2 minus 1, that is 1. So I have the list as 5 and 10. Now let's say I'm making some changes to the list with having 5 elements in it, and rather than printing all the elements in the list, I want to um, stride through and print every third element in the list. Comment them out and try to run the code. Okay, so here I have, as starting with the first element 5, here is the first element, that's why it's printed the first element. Now it says I can go up to the end index 5, that is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. I can go up to the end index but I need only three element in gap. So that's why it getting pass over the 10, 20 and move and going to print the third element, that is 40 in the output. Now next, the element is 80. Yeah, it's coming within the end range, but I just said I need to move over or stride over to the third, the element with the three gaps in it. So that's why the 80 is not included in the output over here. This is stride. Mm, Now another way of getting a list from start to the end of the list. So let me just restart the kernel. Okay, I'm just clearing out my output. Here we have this list. So I just want to start with the index 2, 0, 1, 2 here at 20, and it will print all the elements up to the end of the list. So after doing that, as you see, 20, 40 up to the end of the list, that is 80, are included in the list. Now the next way of printing the list, if we want to print a list from beginning to the end minus 1. So what is the way to do that? This is our list. Here I am beginning, I have not provided any starting position. That means by default it starts with the first position, that is 0, and ends at the end position 4. So let me run the code. And here see, starting with the first index, and as we have mentioned 4, it should take up to 3 because end index minus 1, always we do that. 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's why only this much is included in the output. Now suppose say you don't want to specify any index in the list. If you just want to have a copy of the list at any point of time, so rather than specifying, without specifying any start index or end index, you will be able to have the same copy of the element. So by default, it's starting with 0. By default, end index is equals to your length of the list. So this is all about the string slicing notation, list slicing notation.